Chaos is erupting on the streets of Iran and people are being killed. Now, President Trump is threatening to intervene. Well, Iranian American journalist Lisa Daftari joins us now. Lisa, what is happening in your ancestral homeland?
A lot of media platforms are not covering this. And those who are, many of them are characterizing these protests that are going on in Iran right now as economic protests in response to the economy. And that is absolutely false. It may have been the impetus that brought them out to the streets. This time, over 47 years, we have seen different reasons why people come out onto the streets, but it has always culminated to the same. We want this regime gone, and for good reason. All the money the regime has is being put into terror proxies or into their nuclear or missiles program. None of it is reaching Main Street. The human rights abuses, the tyranny, segregation. You name it. The people have suffered for almost 5 decades. And now the people of Iran are telling the world, we want freedom, we want equality, and we want this regime gone.
So here's the question, Lisa. Even you and I have done segments about how, there's a protest here and there's a protest there. It kind of becomes a little white noise for an American audience. And the question is this different? Is this going to be the time where there's actually a change?
Right. And that's the billion-dollar question here, which I'm asked daily multiple times. Will this time be different? And the answer is, well, one time it has to be different. And, there has to be that perfect storm, right? Look at what happened in 1979 when the Shah of Iran was toppled. And this Islamic insurgency, for lack of a better term, came in and took over the country in a massive revolution. This is even more massive in scale. Look, 90 million people in Iran, the majority of whom are very much disenchanted with this government. And like I said, for good reason. There is not one benefit that people are seeing from being ruled by clerics who rule with Sharia law. Every time that they come out onto the streets, the people like you and I who are interested and are following this ask ourselves, will this time be different? Well, we have Donald Trump in office this time around, somebody who gets this, somebody who has shown support both verbally and otherwise for the Iranian people. And I say otherwise because we just saw the 12-day war in June where he helped Israel, or I shouldn't say helped Israel, but collaborated with Israel, because Donald Trump does see this as an American national security issue as well, to go in for 12 days and, well, the part of the Americans was much shorter than that, but to go in with very targeted strikes against the Iran regime's nuclear sites, because they understand the threat. Look, Iran, if we connect the dots, has come a long way from 1979 when the Shah of Iran was partners with the West, worked along with the West, was very modern, forward-facing, progressive, wanted the best for the women of his country, people to be educated, to dress the way that they want, speak the way that they want. It wasn't perfect, not a utopia, of course. But when you compare it to 47 years later, the country has gone completely backwards, and the people of Iran understand that. And Donald Trump understands that. When you're putting that kind of money into their terror proxies, October 7th, funded and trained by the Iran regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, insurgencies in Iraq and Syria, and the list goes on and on. This is an opportune moment, not just for the Iranian people, but for the world.
Well, when it comes to what's going on the ground in Iran, no one knows it more than you, especially from an American perspective. So here's the question. We're getting conflicting reports. This many people have been killed. It's happening in this many provinces. What are you hearing from what's actually happening?
Right. It's very difficult to verify. I get direct news from people on the ground in Iran, but these are citizen journalists. This is not something that I quickly put on air or quickly, confirm myself. I wait for it, to see, if there are multiple sources confirming and verifying that information. But at the same time, we can say this. This is spreading. And what we're seeing is this evolution, right, of protests that have gone on for the last 5 decades. And each time it becomes more and more widespread, both in depth and in width. And what do I mean by that? Well, in terms of moving across the country, These protests, if we want to compare it to the Green Revolution of 2009, for example, it was contained to the cool kids of Tehran. That's what, the phrase that I throw around a lot, meaning it was more the modern progressive types that were educated and wanted to be more Western. And when you saw them on TV, you would say, oh my gosh, they look just like us. They have their hairdos and they have their designer clothing and they have, whatever it may be. They looked very much Western, but it wasn't going on in the rest of the country. And that's what people would say, well, this doesn't represent all of Iran. Well, since then, we have seen this evolution, this coming of age of the Iranian people, where you have many, many more people coming out, even in the clerical cities like Mashhad, like You have people coming out onto the streets that come from more religious backgrounds that are saying enough is enough. And that tells you, what you need to know about this being a more expansive movement with more people across more provinces. Also, in terms of the societal depth, you're seeing people of all ages come out onto the streets. This is not just young people. A lot of actually the bazaari protests that you're seeing going on in the bazaars, that's the marketplace, a lot of them are older men. They're even retired men that are coming out. We know about the Women Life Freedom protest that went on just a couple of years ago in the aftermath of Masa Amini, the 22-year-old who was beaten to death because she was showing some of her hair. Some of the viewers would recall that those series of protests. Many people felt that was going to be the breaking point, led by women, supported by the men of the country. And of course, that brought a lot of courage, a lot of moral power to the Iranian people that have come out again this time. So again, if I want to connect the dots for people, there are a lot of things in motion. The fact that Israel weakened the country so much in terms of its own military power, in terms of its own posturing with its nuclear capabilities and its boasting, in terms of taking out many heads of government and nuclear and military, in terms of Israel weakening many of its proxies. Those proxies were doing the Iran regime's dirty work and allowing it to stand confidently in the region because it was exporting its brand of Shiite Islam. So you have Trump in office who understands he's putting maximum pressure, maximum support. That is a policy that has worked. It worked in the first Trump administration to weaken this regime. Many people credit that posturing and that policy to lead up to the Women Life Freedom protests, meaning the Trump administration putting on maximum sanctions, giving the Iranian people the support that they need through all sorts of technology. There has been a push to do that, putting many of the leaders of the regime on do not travel lists, putting sanctions on them personally. This has all helped to weaken the tentacles and the regime itself at its core. Now, what do we wait for, right? What's the next question that you're going to ask me? I'm going to just segue it just a drop here. Everyone asks, what will it take, right? And I think that's the point that we're all waiting to hear. What will it take to get from here to an actual revolution that will dismantle this regime?
Well, here's the question. This is an international audience that's watching you now, but we are based in America. And as you know, there is a large faction of Americans that are, quote unquote, tired with regime change. They see what happened in Iraq and then right. They think to themselves, well, is this any better? They see Bashar al-Assad and then this civil war in Syria. You see what happened in Libya, right. Places like Yemen. And there's just this, gosh, guys, let's just stop focusing on the Middle East. And now you have Trump making threats against Iran. And there's just a lot of Americans that are like, okay, time out. We don't want any more of this. Why do you think it's important for Americans to care and, I reading between the lines, push for this change?
Right. So great question. So for the Trump administration has kept up this policy of no boots on the ground, maximum pressure, and maximum support. We'll give you what you need. We'll put out the tweets. We'll support you, but we're going to stop short of regime change. And as you said, there's this knee-jerk reaction in the West, particularly in the United States, and particularly with Republican administrations, to be, very much apprehensive of what regime change can do. It creates a political vacuum. The devil you know is better than the devil that you don't know. It'll make way, for insurgencies. And I remind people that this regime is the insurgency. So when we talk about regime change, when we talk about those fears those risks of regime change, it doesn't apply to all situations. Actually, in the case of the Iran regime, if this regime would fall, if the West would support a regime change in Iran, we would see so many other issues in the world, or bring more stability, I should say, both to the Middle East and to South America, Central America, Africa. I mean, there's so many places. I mean, you would also be destabilizing Russia and China, another two big threats to the United States. So there are a lot of positive reasons as to why we should support regime change. I'm not a proponent of actually getting boots on the ground or actually removing them physically, but I do think that we should consider having the posturing or the rhetoric or the actual policy of supporting regime change should it happen. And I want to remind people, we don't always shy away from regime change. In the case of Venezuela, if you recall, a couple of years ago, the United States was actually participating in some sort of clandestine operation to remove Maduro, because we see Maduro as a threat to the United States. Well, Khamenei and the regime, I would say, is a huge threat to the United States, to the region. Number one global exporter of terrorism, obviously the egregious human rights abuses in Iran. The people of Iran are telling us, we'll partner with you, you partner with us, and let's get rid of this threat once and for all.
Lisa Daftari, you are a wealth of information and perspective. Thank you again for coming on, my friend, and God bless.
Thank you so much for having me.